Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me on the ITV networks. With me again is Dr. Diana Buttu, and I'm very fortunate in that she has afforded me more time to ask more challenging questions. So with that, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back again to Finding Me.
Wa alaikum assalam, it's a delight.
Dr. Diana, in the first interview we spoke about certain things which I think at the heart that many South Africans, especially South African Muslims, think about, especially this concept of division, because we know that with unity comes strength, that the Ummah is supposed to be one, etc. And then you spoke about the Palestinian Liberation Organization as having lost its moral compass. But in what way then can we understand leadership in terms of Palestine? And at which point then will we find that there is somebody who stands up and is representative of the Palestinians? Or do you feel right now that perhaps the one compass that we can look to, or the one direction that we can focus on, is Hamas, and perhaps take the cue from them?
No shortage of leaders.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is we have such a high rate of PhD holders, a high rate of people who are willing to put their lives on the line, people who are active. So it's not that we are lacking leaders, we're lacking leadership. And what I mean by that is that this leadership that is currently in place is a leadership that is very wedded to the Oslo process. And with its marriage to the Oslo process, it means things like establishing the Palestinian Authority with 170,000 employees. It means getting a lot of money from the Europeans and from the Americans in order to continue to function. What we need now as a leadership is to transform and to move away from that. And there are people who are now actively speaking about moving away from the 170,000 employees, being so donor dependent, and looking at ourselves and becoming dependent on ourselves. It's going to be costly. It's going to be painful. It's going to hurt. I know that. But I know that for the vast majority of Palestinians, that liberation is going to taste much better than the salary that they get at the end of the month. So I don't think that we should be moving along the lines of Hamas either. The reason I say this is because they've adopted the same viewpoint. It might not be that they're negotiating directly with the Israelis, but they also believe in having some sort of body that is managing affairs within the Palestinians, within the Palestinian Authority, etc. I think we have to move away from that concept completely, go back to the way it was before 1993, before the authority was established, and look to individual leaders to form a leadership rather than look to individual leaders to form a government.
So basically what you're saying is that you do agree that the time has come to go against the grains. You need a paradigm change and not just a paradigm shift.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. This is a long time coming, and Oslo is a cancer that we're just waiting for it to die at this point in time. We're just waiting for it to die. That being said, there are people who are working on the ground now who are forming things that are alternative in nature. They might be small, but I'm hoping, inshallah, that they'll pick up and they'll take off.
One of the narratives that I've picked up very often from Palestinians talking to them across the board has always been a reluctance to speak out against the Arab leadership. It was always, the Arabs are our brothers, the Arabs do a lot for us, etc. But in this last particular incursion on Gaza, I saw change in terms of the Palestinian response. For the first time ever, watching Palestinian response, I saw the Palestinians speak out against the Arabs. Before, the plea was always, where are the Arabs? Where are our brothers? As if to say, like, really? Do you expect that I would sit and say, honestly, do you honestly believe they're going to come and help you? They're depending on the Palestinian strife for their survival. For as long as there's conflict in Palestine, these leaderships are guaranteed of their authoritative positions. But in the last incursion, the Palestinians came out and they cursed the Arabs. What do you think has brought on this particular change in mindset? Is it an awakening? Is it a realization? What is it?
Look, I think there's a difference between the Arab people and the people. Yes. The people, we know that every Arab backs us and every Muslim stands in solidarity. Yes. We understand that. It's the Arab leadership. And this time, the reason that they were critical is because they've waited for far too long, and they've seen that they're never going to come and say anything. In fact, this time around, it took the Arab League such a long time to even come out with a simple statement condemning Israel. long time. This is not something where it should require any brain cells. You can just look at the children who were in rubble, the 521 children who were killed, their schools destroyed, their hospitals, their future. And it doesn't take a lot for somebody to say this is wrong. And what's happened this time is that Palestinians have recognized that this Arab leadership is so intimately connected with the United States government and with other governments around the world that they will never be able to come out and condemn Israel. If you don't see humanity in a child being killed, a child's school being attacked, then I don't have any hope for you at all. And that's, I think, the realization that happened.
But for as long as this Arab leadership is in power, I mean, in my opinion, the biggest culprits being Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, and then, of course, the follow-ons, Jordan, especially because Jordan's is Transjordania. It's a Palestinian land that has been divided. Do you think that the Palestinian leadership will ever be able to emerge that will be able to challenge not only Israeli authority, but of course this Arab dominance and Arab authoritarianism?
Definitely. When the PLO was initially formed in 1964, the reason that it was formed was because of the fact that they wanted to speak in their own voice. They were tired of the Arab world speaking on behalf of Palestine. And back then, by the way, they spoke better than they spoke today. And so that was the reason that the PLO was actually formed. We wanted to have our own voice. We didn't want anybody speaking on our behalf, and we wanted to challenge Israel. We're now at a situation where our voice has been taken away. The Arab leadership is not speaking on our behalf either, and there's very little challenge to Israel. So the conditions are ripe for a new leadership to emerge. And as I said, we have plenty of leaders. We just need a structure to be able to put them in.
So if your voice has been taken away, is it not possible then to form groups or organizations to seek alliances with people who are more likely to support you than to keep harping down the same tree? And I have more activists coming to South Africa, for example, and engaging the South African government to realize that there is more than just the PLO, that they need to recognize perhaps even Hamas. Okay, but then what really bothers me is that if this is the situation, why did Hamas agree to have the peace talks in Egypt when Egypt is one of your greatest oppressors?
I think people are making a bigger deal out of that than needs to be. I think that when it comes to Egypt is that I don't think they were necessarily recognizing the legitimacy of this government. And maybe they were, I don't know. But I think that it was a practicality issue. The Egyptians have also been maintaining a blockade over Gaza, and I think that Hamas has gotten to the point where it's hurting them, and they know that it's hurting the people of Gaza. And so it was more of a question of practicality. That being said, I have to say, I generally don't focus on the PLO, and I generally don't focus on the Arab world, and I generally don't focus on Fatah or Hamas. Why? My father used to be a soccer player, and the one thing that he always taught me, he was a goalkeeper in soccer. He always taught me that just because there's a goalkeeper doesn't mean you can't score a goal. These people are the goalkeepers, and we are aiming to score a goal. And whether it's through other mechanisms such as BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, or getting people more aware of Palestine and what the Israelis are doing, we are scoring the goal, irrespective of them, not because of them.
I suppose that if you want to score the goals, then you have to simply shift the goalpost.
Absolutely.
Okay, but Palestinians are beginning to score the goal. They still this hegemonic power and the structure and systems in place in the international world in order for you to hold Israel accountable, which means that at some point you're going to need a structure. You're going to have a legitimate voice, and you're going to have representation. How do you envisage that?
It will come. It will come already, even in the face of, we're not facing a lack of we're actually facing an obstacle. We're facing a leadership that is actively trying to suppress our voices, not promote our voices, right? And so I'm confident that it will emerge. Already it is emerging. The fact that the BDS call was made only 9 years ago, and the fact that it's taken off in practically all countries around the world is a testament to the fact that people are looking for these new voices. They're looking for something to do. They want to help Palestine. And I'm confident that it will happen. Whether it's South Africans boycotting Israeli goods, beginning there, to then boycotting those South African companies that are doing business with Israel, to then moving the South African government to push for sanctions, sanctioning the Israeli government, pushing for the ambassador's exclusion. It will happen, inshallah, it will happen. And it's happening not because of this leadership, but because people are so passionate about Palestine. And for that reason, as I was saying earlier, it's these leaders that are holding us back, not pushing us forward.
Okay, so we have to go to a break. When we come back, I just want to pick up on that last point of the leaders holding you back and how to find a way to overcome that particular hurdle. We'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the final segment of Finding Me in the ITV networks today with Dr. Diana Buttu. And of course, we have found out that for the Palestinians, one of the greatest obstacles is leadership. And as the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam always told us, that leadership is very, very important. And of course, the quality of your life is very often determined by the kind of leadership you have. We just have to look at our Islamic history and we will see that this tale is replete with many, many examples. Now, Dr. Diana, if I may come back to that particular point, that the Palestinian leadership is holding you back, and I do see that, and it's very, very frustrating. But whenever you hear representation, when there's official statements, when there is anything that is put forward in terms of a Palestinian viewpoint, it is from these very, very leaders, right? I recently had a discussion with the Palestinian official in one of the embassies here, in the Palestinian embassy here in South Africa. And I said to him, I said, what are you guys doing? You're basically, like in Surah Ankabut, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions of weaving, that the woman who weaves her threads the whole day and then the evening she unravels it. That's how I see the Palestinian Liberation Organization, that during the day they do this and then later on they just break everything apart. And he said to me, well, I have to admit that we're weak. But for how long are we going to be weak when, on the other hand, you see this resilience, you see this fortitude? Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil is the chanting call of the Palestinians. Nobody, I think, can appreciate or understand it as much as the Palestinians understand it.
Yeah, Quraysha, they choose to be weak. It's a choice. When it's not they are weak, they choose to be weak. Nobody has made them weak. They choose to be weak. And what I mean by that is, you see children in Gaza who are very, very, very young, who, despite the fact that they know that they will likely not have the greatest future, who know that tomorrow is going to be worse than today. And these children are strong. They continue to go on to school. They continue to go on to university. They continue to become people who continue to struggle for their freedom. You see mothers who continue to send their children off to school. You see families who rebuild a house after the Israelis have demolished it. There's one town where the entire town has been demolished 66 times. And the community continues to come together and rebuild it, not with the help of the Palestinian Authority, but despite them. So this is a leadership that is choosing to be weak. It's not choosing to be strong. If they tapped into our strength, if they tapped into the resilience, if they tapped into the creativity, you would see Palestine be free today. But they choose to be weak. They choose to remain subservient to the Americans and to the Israelis, and they choose to walk around saying that they're weak.
Okay, so is there something that can be set into motion now? For example, exactly like how Palestinian societies, more than 125 NGOs, different organizations came out and endorsed BDS. And of course, it was done without the Palestinian Authority. So they came out, endorsed BDS. 2005, BDS has grown. Is there something that can trigger the same kind of response from Palestinian society to say, we want to change in leadership, make it official?
It's already happening. The BDS call that happened in 2005, it's only been 9 years. This was done despite the leadership. And in fact, what's interesting is that now the leadership is beginning to a little bit accept BDS and sign on basically to it, but in small forms. They're still afraid to push for sanctions. They're still afraid to push for divestment. They're only talking about boycotting Israeli settler goods, as though there's somehow a difference between what Israel's doing in 48 and what Israel's doing in 67. So that's already begun. The The alternative leadership has already begun, and it already is in motion. There are villages where there are weekly protests every Friday, which the Palestinian Authority is nowhere to be seen. They're capturing the world's attention, and with social media, more and more people are becoming involved. So it's already taking shape. It will catch like wildfire soon, and soon the Palestinian Authority will not know what hit them, and they will be forced to either adopt the same strategy or go away.
Obviously, we're fighting a war, and if you look at the imbalance in the war, the Palestinians cannot win this or fight this war and win it, because it's just totally impossible. You're a stateless people without a military, without weapons, etc., and you're fighting the third or fourth largest army in the world. The playing fields are not level, they're not equal. But to get victory, and now this is coming again to the Islamic viewpoint, there must be a reassessing of one's loyalties. Has this discourse entered the Palestinian circles in terms of the serious leadership and the serious thinkers? And I think of perhaps somebody like Sheikh Khalid Yassin, who was assassinated and perhaps who embodied that Islamic philosophical understanding. Is there an awareness now to that particular discourse, to reassessing those loyalties?
Absolutely. The last attack on Gaza, if you saw the public opinion polls that came out after the last attack, Palestinians knew who was standing in solidarity and who wasn't. They knew that the Palestinian Authority was treating Gaza as though it was a separate country.
Yes.
Like we heard better statements coming from South Africa than we heard from the Palestinian Authority. So people saw that, and the public opinion polls are reflecting that. The issue today is that they're so entrenched in power and that they're not letting go. We have a president who's 79 years old, who is not only not letting go, but he's not letting us have elections. Now, people can say, why aren't the Palestinians protesting against that? And people do say that. But the fact of the matter remains that we're caught between a rock and a hard place. We're stuck between the Israelis on the one hand and the Palestinian Authority on the other hand. And with limited energy, people always say, we prefer to put our energy towards struggling against the Israeli occupation rather than struggling against the Palestinian Authority. And I agree. I think that the Palestinian Authority will is either it's on the verge of collapse one way or another, financially or politically. And I think that there are enough people in Palestine who see the Palestinian Authority for what it is and recognize how deficient it has been in all aspects of life, not just politically, that they have turned away from it, and it's simply a question of time.
But aren't the patronage networks so deep that, when you have people who are benefiting financially, that they're reluctant to turn over? Aren't you going to face the same kind of resistance from your own people?
Absolutely. And we are going to face that resistance, but it's a house of cards. It's a house of cards. I think that what the PLO has done in terms of the patronage lines are deep. You're absolutely right. But people more than anything else want their freedom, and I think at the end of the day, it's simply a house of cards. It's interesting if you look at the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, of which I'm one of them. There are no patronage lines. There are no paychecks that are coming in, etc. And yet you see some of the most fervent, the most active, the most energetic protests and actions from that group of people, because they recognize, they see exactly what the Israeli plan is. They see what Israel's trying to do to them. And they're so active in pressing for their liberation as well, not just as a equality struggle or a civil rights struggle, but liberation and return.
What can the South Africans do in supporting the Palestinian struggle? And what is very important, especially for South African Muslims to understand that this is not a religious conflict.
That's exactly for step one.
Yes.
Step one is that this is not a religious issue. This is an issue of humanity, and that's why Muslims are attached to it, because at our core, it's an issue of humanity. Islam is an issue of is a religion of humanity, and so that's the first thing. But the second thing is that we look to South Africa. I have to say this: every time I come to South Africa, I feel as though I'm coming home. The love, the compassion, the warmth, the solidarity. I can't use enough adjectives to describe exactly how I feel when I come here. And that's why I think that this is the birthplace of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. We already are in South Africa. People already are boycotting Israeli goods, and that's fantastic. But it needs to move a step further, 2 steps further. First, we need to start boycotting those South African companies as well that are doing business with Israel.
Like Woolworths, for example.
Exactly. Exactly. And, or those companies that are South African that are working inside Israel or with Israeli companies. But then beyond that, we have to start pushing this government to sanction Israel. The ANC already has sanctions within their party platform. The Communist Party already does. But that's not enough. They can't hide behind government any longer and say, oh, the government, we as government act a different way. They are the government. And just as we were individuals who were struggling against this concept of constructive engagement during the time of apartheid South Africa, meaning that we didn't believe that the Canadian government should maintain ties with South African apartheid because you can't be supporting both sides. So too, the South African government has to cut the ties of constructive engagement.
But I want you to address this question for me specifically. The problem is that South African Muslims have distanced themselves from politics, from engagement, from even associating with the South African government. They have believed that it is not their arena to get involved in. But you know, as a Palestinian Israeli also, that politics is intrinsically a part of your life and it contributes to your freedom, it contributes to your equality, etc., not that it provides it. What kind of a message would you like to give to the South African Muslims, and that will be your parting thought?
The South African Muslim community is a lot stronger than you're giving yourselves credit for, meaning that these political parties are looking to the Muslim community now as being the swing vote. Being the swing vote means you have a lot of power. You have the power to push for sanctions. You have the power to make sure that not only that your freedom remains, but that you're pushing for the freedom of others. And this is what I urge the Muslim community to do here.
And to engage in the boycott, divestment, sanctions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
As a last positive note, what would you like?
We are at the tipping point. Really, I wouldn't be in South Africa if I didn't believe that our freedom is just around the corner. And inshallah, with the help of the South African community, we will get there soon.
And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Nasru min Allahi wa fathun qareeb wa bashiril mu'mineen. So perhaps we can give glad tidings to the Palestinians too. So with that, fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for sharing your time with me again. Till we meet again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.